And you can come up if you want to come up. We each have our own microphone. Hello. Welcome. There's a few people still grabbing their seats. Um, Thanks for coming out. I'm Damon Clinkscales. I'm the chapter director for Startup Grind Austin. I wanted to just welcome you all here and tell you a little bit about Startup Grind. It's a global event series, a global community. I think there's like 500 chapters all over the world. And the Austin chapter's been around for 4 or 5 years, and I've been doing it for about 2 years. But we bring up entrepreneurs, investors, people from the scene, from the local scene, and that happens all over the world. So whoever is into entrepreneurship, say you're in Rwanda or wherever you are, they have these places for you to gather, and it's really cool. So Austin has kind of an embarrassment of riches when it comes to people to bring on stage. And tonight we have Monica Landers. We're very excited to have her here. And she's going to chat with me, and then she'll have a chance to take questions from you guys as well. And then we'll have some more time to hang out afterwards. So it's kind of a long, drawn-out, relaxed event where we get some food, we chat with Monica, and then we all kind of chat some more afterwards after we've had the context of her, her story. So if you need, just logistically, if you need a restroom, they're not actually in this room. They're out in the hotel, kind of head off to the right and head down towards those doors down there, past the elevators, and you'll see the restrooms on the right. And I kind of laid out what our time frame is. We technically wrap up at around 9 o'clock. Are you going to be able to hang out afterwards a little bit? Okay, cool. So I think that's pretty much it. So I'm going to take a seat. And this is Monica Landers. She is a background in sort of network news, I guess, way back in the day, and now has an AI analytics company in the entertainment and publishing industry called StoryFit. And I met Monica when I was a Techstars mentor. She was going through Techstars here in Austin, and it's been great to see sort of her growth as she's gone through and built this company. And we're going to talk to her about her story, how she got here, where she comes from, and sort of some lessons learned along the way. And yeah, we'll kick it off. So thank you for joining us.
Sure, good to be here.
So I guess just to sort of, give us a background for where you come from, it would be helpful to know sort of where you grew up and what was your upbringing like, a little bit about your backstory.
So I'm actually from Austin. I grew up here in Austin.
Oh my!
I know.
She's a unicorn.
Not many of us, but we're still here. And my family is from Texas and have a. They grew up. I guess we're the first kind of city folk, but everybody else is ranching. You probably know some of my relatives. So the Luckenbaugh, my grandmother's a Luckenbaugh, and so Luckenbaughs and Nimitz and all of the kind of German families are where I came from. And so I think the only really interesting part of childhood is growing up in a family where really German was spoken until they went to school. And so, we never really had like family reunions. We had work days. And so it was a very serious, strong, like focused family where you really were valued for the work you got done. And so it certainly produces a lot of hard working people. So I looking back and as you grow up and you hang out in other households, like my friends who are from Latin America, for example, have a lot more fun when their family gets together and we do jobs. And so I just always think that was highly influential for me. I think the focus, though, for me, like from third grade on, is I wanted to be a television journalist, partly because when people came to talk to your school, the only woman that came was a TV journalist, and so I really was like, well, there's something I could do, and I love the idea of telling stories and also of being in the middle of it all. And so I went to school and pursued journalism, and right out of school started working for ABC News. I'd done gobs of internships up till then, and so managed to get one of the few entry-level positions. I mean, it's just a highly competitive environment. I had thought at one point I wanted to be on air and realized really quickly that the best job was to produce, because it meant you just get dropped into the middle of a situation and had to figure it out. And so a lot of what I really learned, and I was there almost a decade, and that I apply now, was from those years. I always worry about some of my developers that I hired that it's their first job, because I know I'm not running meetings and running the company like a typical engineering company. My meetings are really just like daily news show meetings. I don't say all the same words, but a lot of the way I organize my thought and how I organize the internal timing really is like putting on a news show every day. What it means is that you have to react fast. I was required, so throughout my 20s, to have a packed bag with me at all times. So it meant if I got notified or paged, literally going into a party, I could call a taxi right then and get straight to the airport. And so I did this for years. And what it meant is that you're dropped into a situation, you have to quickly identify, just find your way, understand what's happening. I would be in charge of a crew, so it'd be a camera guy and a sound guy. They were always guys. And then usually had to get things prepped for on-air talent. I usually coordinated them with an editor, but it meant I had to figure out the story, find the people to talk to. And when you think of running a company, it's a lot of the elements that you do then. You understand what you're doing, who's your audience, right? Who do you need to find to make the product? It's just that we had daily products. And so that quick decision-making and also quick learning, right? I'm sure all of you had the experience of really needing to learn something and figure things out every day, but having that happen over and over again every day was really been good for me. I also got to produce for some of the greats. So I worked with Diane Sawyer and Ted Koppel and Charlie Gibson, and Barbara Walters. And so to get to work with people who really were just so professional and made this look so much easier than it really is, was great as well, because I have certainly found the last year to be a lot of public speaking and a lot of presenting the company, and that wasn't something that I ever wanted to get into. I purposely was a producer. I liked being off air, but having the ability to put kind of the show and the story around what we're doing, I found to be very helpful. I think raising money feels like one big show, right? It feels like it's a lot. It matters a lot more how I present myself and how I present the company first. Then you got to prove that there's something real there. But boy, if you don't get that story first and don't connect and find a way to connect to the investors, then you just don't get to go further. So turns out, without knowing it, that the time I spent television news was really great and was a great baseline then for what I'm doing now.
Absolutely. So can you tell us sort of, I'm sure you have a lot of stories past that were situations you were dropped into, having to get the story, maybe even some that were dangerous. Is there anything you can share with us to give us the flavor of what you went through in your 20s to sort of prepare you for this entrepreneurial life?
Yeah, even though this is going to date me terribly. So I was on a plane when there was a report from Oklahoma City that there had been an explosion and maybe some dead. So that was how quickly I was on a plane, and by the time I landed, we knew it to be, at the time, the worst terrorist attack in the U.S. And so what I had to do is quickly, I could fly there. I was at the time closer, so I think I just had to fly from Atlanta. And so once I got there, I had to quickly get the lay of the land, because half of New York then were going to be flying in, and they would just charter so they could do the whole show from there. So the kinds of things that happen as you land, I jumped on the back of a Red Cross truck and just kind of blended in, which is one of the things that's really easy to do as a woman. There's all these negatives, but I could always get past barriers. No one thought I was up to anything, right? I'm a white woman. Like, how much trouble could I get into? So I could always get past barriers, but I got in there right there with where the bodies were laid out. I found how to find a building where we could broadcast from. We ended up scrambling, and so it's a really fast turnaround. So finding people to fill a show, but it also means some really hard conversations. Like I found the head, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a nursery right at the front on the first floor. And so contacting all the parents there was only a few children that lived, contacting them, finding the head of the nursery. I think I found them in a house. And to now I don't remember how I did it, but figured out where they lived. And by now it's like midnight. The show starts in 5 hours, and just knocking on the door and convincing people to share their stories on the air and to help us kind of build this story. But it was a hard couple days, and just trying to get the lay of the land and be the person that can then again be the platform for the show to go. I've been in houses of people before they confess, like when we didn't know they were the murderers, and then they confess, and landed in Port-au-Prince when I was held in a military compound when American planes were flying over to bomb. So Carter was negotiating at the time. I mean, like lots of stories where you're just in these really tough situations and still trying to find your way out. I mentioned before that I've done my job at gunpoint. And so I always use that as like, look, if I can there was about, 15 young men with machine guns who pulled my driver one way, the kid that had pointed the directions into a car and driven off, and I was just left standing there. Oh, and we were speaking French. So after that, I just thought, there can't be anything stressful, right? Everything is just making a decision. So I think I'm really grateful in retrospect to have had all those craziness.
Your life's so boring now.
It's
not stressful at all.
I don't have as many good stories. And I guess that's the other thing is I'm used to traveling, so the travel I do now is hard, mainly because I'm older. But I still nothing kind of compares to like the intensity of that. And I find it interesting too. It's like such a different experience, like that intensity of being able to kind of make things happen fast is something I haven't ever seen since. And when we do get together with TV people, you just don't have the sense of deadlines and quick iterations, even in startups. And that's been something interesting for me, because in startup world, everybody thinks they're moving so fast, and I'm like, it smells, pretty slow. And so I think that's really helped me kind of be steady, in the work now.
It makes me wonder though. You're so used to these quick turns that seems really useful in startups because things are always changing. But then how do you do longer term planning when you're used to this culture and mindset of quick delivery?
Mm-hmm. It's true, and there's a couple things that I actively work to hire around, because I think that's really important. And in fact, we spent an hour and a half with the company today talking about that to make sure and recognize how important, just because I'm not focused on one set of details doesn't mean it's not important. It means it's absolutely crucial, and so let's make sure we have people working. So the two pieces that I do always make sure I spend time working on is making sure that the details are covered so that I can keep running fast, because I do that better, but also making sure that I have conversations and I'm articulating. So a lot of times what happens is I have the long-term plan in my head, and so I'm good, I'm on track, but I think the communicating it is where I always reach out. And I have a lot of advisors because of Techstars and Capital Factory. I do have people that I can spend time with and talk through that. So I find that that's best way to just kind of really test and see if what I'm building, makes sense long term.
Do you have any kind of philosophies around the team you've built? How do you hire? How do you hire your team? Because I know you're surrounding yourselves with these complementary people, but what goes into your thought process when you've been building it?
I think about this a lot, and I have a lot of philosophies and ideas. I'm not sure they're all right, and I'm also not sure I can always do what I'd like to do, but I really think it's important to hire people that think differently. And it's hard because as soon as you do that, you also get conflict. So when you start hiring people that are opposites, the person who talks fast and just wants to move fast versus the person who just wants to take time and really dig deep, or the person who is, the extreme of talking and extroverted, and the person who just needs peace and quiet. So all of these types of people come with, I think, a unique set of skills and an approach that's beneficial, but sometimes it's really hard to put everyone in the mix. Now, I think we have, one of the things that's easy to hire for is kind people. So I think we have a wonderful group of thoughtful people. But when push comes to shove, you need this kind of diversity in thought. And so I do spend time trying to make sure everyone recognizes that or for example, I have a salesperson I just hired who, in the format that I use to really identify work styles, he and I are opposite. And so I've said, look, we are opposite in the way we do all these things. Let's be really cognizant of it. But I think as a CEO and boss, you have to make sure you get the message that just if you're different than me, that doesn't make me right and you wrong. Like, I need you to think your way and I need you to share your ideas. So that's what I try to instill. But it is hard. And this one sales guy I almost didn't hire because I couldn't put my finger on it, but I was like, man, I'm going to drive him crazy. Like, he is going to get so tired of me. Even he thinks this is going to be a good fit, but what I thought is this is not going to be a good fit. But once I took some more time, I realized, it's just because of this communication style and the way we're thinking and the way we approach. So once I figured out that, I'm like, this is going to be great. This is what you want, is your partner that's exactly opposite from you. So I'm excited about it now, and that's the way I approach it. But boy, it doesn't always work out that way.
How do you make sure that all these people are kind of moving in the right direction, the same direction that is in your head? Are there like rituals, or how do you?
Yeah, and I don't think I'm a natural at this. I have found that, I don't think I'm good at this, frankly. But what I do is I try and spend the time to have one-on-one conversations, because I find that that's when people process better. So it's like I can stand up in front of the whole group all the time and say, this is what we're doing, this is who we are. But it's not the same as saying it to one person, because with one person they'll say, well, why? But last time I thought you said this. And so I find that those conversations are a better way of helping people to get on board, but it takes a lot of time. And so I tend to, as soon as a sales call or something that's business or investor related or outward facing comes in, I cancel those one-on-one meetings so fast, it's ridiculous. I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think the solution is one-on-one. I'm just more saying, everything I'm up here saying, I think you should do. I don't always do, but I find that that's the best way to really make sure everyone's on board.
And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about too is you've raised several rounds of funding. I'm wondering if along the way, there's probably people in the audience that are building companies they want, have already raised or want to raise funding. What kinds of things come to mind when you think about how do you go about raising funding?
I think the first.
How do you handle investors at the different stages? If you want to start with
the early
early,
Is anyone raising money right now? Like, is anyone in the angel seed, Series A, way past it? Are you already to that next raise? In the seed, okay. So I think the most important part is, and the hardest, is identifying what stage you're in and really being clear. And I know that I personally had a real resistance as I was talking to people that were like, you're not ready this, or you should do this. And a lot of it I don't find is very logical. And so sometimes it's like, well, that can't be. I mean, these people say they're early investors. They probably want to talk to me, or these people, So I remember pushing back against it a good bit. And I think lesson learned is, man, you waste a lot of time if you talk to people who aren't the right stage. And I know everyone says, ask questions, find out they're really interested, find out the right fit first before you invest your energy. But it's so hard to do. So because you meet someone, you think, I'll give them the song and dance and tell them about how great we are and what we're going to do. And I think I'll go through my raises real quick. So we did a 600, it might have been 650 angel round. And that was mostly in Texas, and a lot of it was in Austin. And that was right during Techstars. So, if you're in Techstars, you kind of come out with this boost of people that are interested. And then later, from then on, though, all my raises have been out of Austin for the most part, except Capital Factory as an investor. But after that, then I had, it's about 1.3 really early seed that was from a strategic investor out in New York. And there were a couple others that went in, but mostly from strategic. And then this last raise was about $2 million, and it was VC-led, again, out of New York. And so those are really very distinct phases. And that second, though, stage when I was getting strategic money, I really thought I was ready for a seed round and started talking to investors and VCs in New York. It's just a better fit for my company in New York. That said they were early seed, and they just weren't. And so I think that identifying it, and I'm kind of shortening it. I know there's not a lot of details, but really, really knowing where you fit and where you belong is important, because there are certain stories they're just doing, pattern matching. And if you're not in there with what they're looking for and you don't have most of the boxes checked, it's just not a good fit. The VC that led this last round, what happened that he was ready to go is because they had been watching for a company like us. They were just sure and like, where is a company? This should be happening. Someone should be doing this. So for him, there was already the check on we were going after the right industry. We had the right kind of product and the right technology. So then all I had to prove is that I had the right team and that I could do it. And so once you know the conversation you're having, it's a lot different. I have noticed that there are certain questions that once investors at any size start pushing back on or questioning, that I have never convinced them. And there's one question, and again, this has taken 4 years for me to be able to say this, that there's one question when they say, I'm just not sure of the industry size. Entertainment's a $2 trillion business, I mean, there's a lot of money. And when they say that, I know I can never win them over. Like, they'll never come back because they don't know the industry well enough to really believe me when I say this is where we fit into it. And lots of other reasons. And I bet for every single person, there's a question that you'll realize that you cannot recover from. It happened again with some that wanted to do a follow-on on this round. There were some people that wanted in, and we had just closed out. And I said, well, let's talk after it's closed. I didn't want to risk having any more negotiation on the round. And so I talked to them after, and they were really excited. I mean, all their words were 100 in, and they said, the only thing we're stuck on is the industry size. And I remember smiling to myself because it's just when I had just decided that question is unrecoverable. But I did what I think everyone does is, I'm still not going to give up. I'm going to try, maybe. But in the end, they weren't interested. And so I think if you can figure out what the point is that that isn't ever going to be a good fit, that's good. And I don't think that the question is true for everyone. I think everyone has an unrecoverable part about their company that if someone doesn't get or doesn't believe in, you should just walk away from the conversations.
So for the VC part, take us inside the room when you're trying to pitch your company. What kinds of questions are they asking, and what's your mindset?
I joke because someone told me I have the I'm interested face. So I always feel like there's this expression and then there's this, this level of like, I am engaged. So I was just, when you said that, I thought,
smile.
I'm much more
You're
in.
engaged.
Yeah, I'm listening. My eyes are open. So on this one, it was lots of conversation. So it's not just one. But the couple things that I noticed in the process of negotiating, so FFVC led this round, through the hard points, the points where we disagreed on, it was AJ that I talked to the most. He was consistently collaborative. So he from the beginning said, hey, let's make a deal that neither of us like. But he did as a joke saying, look, I'm willing to bend and you're going to we're going to have to meet in the middle here. And a couple things that he asked for, I'm trying to remember what. I remember he asked for a couple things, and I finally said, look, that's just punitive. Like I don't even know how to have the conversation, because don't you see what that's the ripple effect on me? And he paused and said, okay, how about this? But what if, and he gave me all sorts of things that I could be asking for that I hadn't. So the fact that he was actually trying to make it work by giving me some ideas that I hadn't thought of, like, well, you could do it this way. I was like, great idea. So in other words, even at our very hardest and really most, like this kind of conversation, he was super professional, super supportive of me and of the company, like how can we make this work? And so I thought, I still feel very lucky to have them on board. We were certainly pitching like crazy, because the other risk that happens is he's like, hey, talk to all these guys. So now there's all these other groups that he respects, that he wants us to talk to. So suddenly it's all ramped up about what, like now I need to get them all on board, or else he's still not going to feel good about it. And there was one group we got on board that he valued a lot, and it's good that they came, and another group that he thought would like us in the end backed out. And so that to me just raised the stakes. So even though I felt like I had FFVC and they were interested, I knew the other hurdles I had to jump through, and they felt more dangerous because they weren't already on. One of the groups that backed out in the end said, we're not ready to admit we're using technology like yours, right? So this was a big entertainment group, and they're like, we just don't want anybody to know yet. and they're still interested in doing a project. And we're talking to them, but you like, anyway. So that's dicey. The other just I think interesting part and more just words of warning is I was excited about the strategic investment, but what happens is they're not investors, so they didn't have money sitting back for the next round. And you have all these VCs saying, well, why isn't your last round putting in more money? I'm like, well, because that's not what they do. They were also in the middle. They're a multi-billion-dollar company in the middle of an acquisition by another huge company. So this was all happening. And they're like, yeah, we love you, Monica, but we're really doing other things now. And so it wasn't something, they weren't kind of bought into the whole system of raising money and understanding that by not investing, this was a huge strike against me. And so that was something we had to overcome. And I did all sorts of things to overcome it. Obviously, it worked out. The other thing that happened is we had our round almost full. I think we had 1.5. And we had a group come in out of China that wanted to finish it. And we said, great. And then they said, well, we really want to put in $1 million. We don't want to do less. And so this blew up my round just a little bit. And I'd already negotiated with everyone else. So I took the hit on the valuation to let them in. Because in the end, I was like, well, they'll be good to have in. We'll get more money. And I don't know if you understand if you've been through it, the kind of juggle you make. But what happened next is they said, we don't want to be in just for that. We want to be in for 1.5. So now it's really starting to fill out. It's just a $2 million raise, and so now they're pushing it to 3 or 3.5. So it was getting a little bit out of control, but they were like, it's all or nothing. We're not coming in for a smaller amount. So I had to lower my valuation to get them in, but the promises were big. It was so much money, and so we looked at what we could hire and what we could do, and I thought, this is really going to make a big difference. Let's just go for it. And then it was ready to close. Everyone was waiting, and they changed the mind. And they were, the main guy just got frustrated. He said, we don't like what's happening with the U.S. and Chinese relations. I mean, just kind of, and just also, so to suddenly have that blow up, well, it's not like I can go back to everyone else and say, hey, hi, drop that valuation for these guys to come in. I want to bring it back up. So it really was something that long term, it's going to be fine. It's not going to be a big deal. We're going to win or lose, and this isn't going to be something I'll be talking about a year from now. But I do think when you're thinking about raising, that all these little things that can happen, they all add up. And when they all happen at the same time, it's a lot to juggle. And the COO who was working with me to get through it said this was one of the most complicated rounds he's ever. I don't know why it got so loud. Sorry. This is one of the most complicated rounds he ever got through. I'm doing something weird.
Aren't you supposed to have good mic technique since you're from network
I
news?
like a lavalier, preferably. Oh. This feels more like a singer now.
You weren't actually on TV, though. You told me you're
way off
putting
TV.
the stories together, and then an anchor would say your words.
Exactly.
So I guess how did you come to found Authors.me, which became StoryFit? Do you consider yourself to be, someone who always wanted to be an entrepreneur, or was it kind of accidental, or do you even consider yourself to be an entrepreneur? How did you come to start a company?
I don't feel much like an entrepreneur. I always feel a little awkward identifying myself that way because I don't have a drive to have my own company. I did love this project, and I saw it as something, I was like, I know exactly how I would do it. I know, I just felt like I knew it and wanted to do it. But I don't have some of the things I think drive a lot of entrepreneurs of wanting to have it themselves or just not wanting to work for a large company. I love big companies. What's more fun than a giant paycheck for a while, right? And having a whole team. I don't know why I'm yelling now. Maybe it sounds normal. Okay, it's just.
You're very good at projecting.
Anyway, so no, I don't identify with being an entrepreneur. I think it's great that there's so much support. It almost has rock star status in Austin now, which I think is kind of funny but cute. Right, is that now there's a group and everyone can find people to talk to. I sure do rely on my CEO startup confidants and having that group of people that I can talk to. And so that's the group I really identify with that came from Techstars that you mentioned. Yeah. Oh, I didn't really answer how I got here.
Well, yeah, I was wondering how you came to be a founder and what was it about the project and how did it come to be? Basically, how did your company come into existence?
So after I left ABC, there were just so many exciting startups, and at the time there's not people with experience in telling stories across a technical platform, right? I mean, this is still early days. And so, and I was ready to move back to Austin. I thought, how great, I'll join a startup. I was the number 3 hire for a startup. And it was content-based. And so it didn't last very long. It was like a boom, boom. Although it kind of came back into being, eventually got acquired by Demand Media, which is a California-based company, but the development group was here. So I ended up running the R&D group here. So to make long story of jobs short is that I've consistently then for years had a creative team and a development team, and had lots of content between it. And so that was what really, when this came up, Demand Media, a lot of what we worked on is predicting the success of short form content, of online content. And so it's building the algorithms that helped connect and identify the audience that would match with a certain piece of content. And there was tons of traffic. At its peak, I think it was something like 1 out of 7 people on the internet were on a Demand Media page. And so we had lots of data.
So even at Demand Media, you were working on the problem of predicting
Yeah.
content success.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so even though I'm not a data scientist, the kind of thought of how do we measure stories and what can we measure in it, we were building algorithms and testing it, and we had data scientists that could run it. So it wasn't as NLP focused as what we're doing now, but it was still building predictive algorithms. I mean, we were able to say that certain themes, had a higher hit rate on like Wednesdays and Sundays, or we were able to say, so we would find things that could predict. We were able to figure out which platforms to launch on YouTube, or where we had so many websites of where to put a piece of content. So really then through that, someone had this idea of doing it for books. And he came to me because he was just looking in Austin and thought, well, you're connected, and who can you help find to do this? And I remember asking him questions because I thought he had already done it, right? And I'm like, well, have you? And finally I realized he hadn't done it. He's like, I don't know how to do it. I was like, I know how to do that. And I loved the idea. And so that's when we started building it and brought another developer that I worked with at Demand Media on. And I was with another startup at the time, and so I quit that startup and worked on this one. And so that's how it started. We real quickly figured out that what we could do was applicable in the studio space as well, and there's just more money in the movies than there is publishing, and so that's where we expect to have the biggest growth. But in the meantime, publishing gives us a good story, it's baseline revenue for the company, and it gives us credibility on the studio side because they believe in the books.
So you have this idea, you know how to do it, at least you think you do, and you've got a few people that are in, but how do you quit your job? Like, how do you make money to start something like this? And how do those people that join alongside you, did they have jobs, or did they also quit? Or how do you go build that thing that you know in your head can work when everybody sort of has to make a living?
Well, and I was super naive too. I thought the last 7 years at Demand Media was like running a startup because we were a startup within a larger company. But I'd forgotten this was like a well-funded startup where when it didn't work, we just went, oh, well, and threw it over our shoulder and started the next project. And so I had forgotten because it'd been I had kind of forgotten and thought I could do things faster than I could. But basically, I talked to my husband, and we were ready for change. He had done lots of startups, but by then had just moved to a larger company, and I think he's like constantly in that startup to acquisition. And so we just said, hey, let's do this. This will probably just take a couple years. We've got some savings. And so the savings, I put a little money in the company, but really the savings were just to make up for the salary loss, which we thought would be for a year. It turns out there's still a salary loss, but so that's really, I think that's why it really is a lot easier to do startups if you're either young and don't have kids and a house that you're gonna stay in and kind of have your spending set, or you're where we are and at least have savings or have multiple people working and putting money in. I can't imagine how I would have done it. I can't imagine that I was saved enough or felt secure enough to do it if I were single. And so having that support, made a big difference.
So how do you bridge the gap? You get some product built, and then how do you get some kind of funding support that is not your own money, what do you have to show to get some investments? I mean, is this where Techstars came in, or was this before you even got to that point?
So I didn't go to Techstars till we had been around for a whole year. And so this was me and then the original co-founder working for nothing. Our main developer stayed at his job, so he still had an income and really just didn't sleep for a year. And so I think that's such a hard stage, and I just really feel for anyone who's in that phase. Like, I don't want to do that again. I will come in at this phase fine, but that early bit where you have no money to build something or to do the kinds of what it takes to do all the sales and yet have to prove it, I think it's really hard to get money without that, without the proof point. So you need to have customers, and you need customers who are happy, and you need to have, I think by the time, we weren't making lots of money, but what happened is I had already had talked to several of the angel funds by Techstars, and so during Techstars I started closing, and then at the end of Techstars came another push, and so by then we had probably 30 publishers on the using the what we had then platform, and that made it work. So the Techstars vote of confidence plus 30 customers and we had a very robust. Oh, I got really lucky too, and I think this is part of startups working, is 4 or 5 of the guys, super 20-year experience developers that I worked with at Demand Media, by then they were changing what they did and they put them all on contract, but there wasn't any work. So these guys were being paid, were not allowed to work for anyone else, but were bored. They came into the Techstars, these experienced guys, and worked on my platform for several hours every day. So it's a team. They didn't want anything. They weren't supposed to take money, but they asked permission from Demand Media, and Demand Media is smart enough to say no, that the guys need to stay engaged, or they're just going to look for something else. So that was just a couple months, but I had a very robust platform because of it, and it let me just completely mind disappear from what was happening on the platform, because these guys I'd worked with for years and were so trusted. So that bit of luck, I think, makes a huge difference. Yeah.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that. Yeah. I'm going to turn it over to the audience here in just a minute, but I was wondering if you had any final thoughts, people that are, entrepreneurs out there, or they're wanting to be potentially entrepreneurs. If you have any kind of advice for them that you've learned along the way, you want to share anything that particularly resonates with you?
Well, I think what I'm about to say is going to sound really depressing, but I actually mean it motivationally, is I think it's really hard, and you're often by yourself. And I think I say that only because then if you're in the situation, you don't think you're crazy. Because every other founder that I talk to has this feeling of just complete isolation. Because a lot of what I'm doing, I can't pass on. I can't pass on all the ups and downs to my team, because they would be like, it's worse, right? They have no control over it. And so a lot of it I just have to kind of keep as level as I can. And that's really hard. And I think also the investor conversations feel fairly abusive sometimes. And I say feel because I don't think, it's not that they're necessarily doing anything wrong, but day after day of having people really tell you what you're doing is a bad idea, and really, you seem nice, but I just don't think this is going to work. That is really hard to take, and there's just no way you can pass that on to your team every day, who you want to work hard and feel inspired, that you've just been shot down all day long. And so I think I just think knowing that that's a reality maybe helps you at least know to reach out, and that if you ask anyone else, they're going to say the same thing. I've got so much support, more than I ever reach out to, but I at least know it's there. Amos, who runs Techstars here, has been great, and even though it was several years ago, and I talked to he wanted me to talk to his class recently, and afterwards he's like, Monica, you didn't tell him about all of these. It was all these hard times. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And he goes, I'm going to give you notes next time because I want them to understand these hardships. I'm like, well then what? I don't really remember that. And he said, Monica, I'm still traumatized by the phone calls. And I was like, yeah, I don't really remember. I just don't. And so that you
blocked it out.
I blocked it out, yeah. And so I just think that sort of is reality, and it's better to know it going into it and find the resources, whether it's a support network or just a way to cope from the beginning. Because I've not talked to anyone who hasn't gone through it, but there's a lot of people who don't say it out loud or admit to it or whatever. And so I think that just increases sort of the isolation that you can feel as you're going through it.
Right, it tends to be glamorized and
Yeah.
like you were saying about being rock stars and all that.
Yeah, rock stars in Austin, entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks very much for the chat. And thanks, Monica, for joining us. All right, so I'm going to pass the mic to anyone who has a question for Monica, and we'll just kind of take it around the room, okay?
Thank you. Monica, could you tell us a little bit more about those, the difference that you mentioned about how innovation goes in the entertainment industry and how you thought it was a little bit faster than it is in startups? Like what variables are involved, what strikes you initially?
Well, part of it is just the way, I mean, my experience, again, everyone's got a common goal and it's going to happen in maybe just 6 hours. And so the conversation is more rapid fire. You don't have time to necessarily bring everybody on board. Everyone just does their job. And so I notice that now as I, as you deal with team and conversations and the question about how do you bring everyone on board, we didn't have to do any of that. And people just like, you just did what it was and everybody ran and it was more yelling and it was just a lot more direct and fast. And so in a sense, if you're comfortable with that work style, boy, it saves a lot of time. There's no like, hi, how are you? What did you do this weekend? It's like, okay, get the exterior shot. We're going to go do this. And so that tone of voice is normal talking. You can't really do that anymore. So that's sort of my experience of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's one behind you. Yeah.
Hi, I just walked in from another networking event, so I apologize for lack of context.
Okay.
I don't have a question proper, but I'm a fellow startup founder, and so I just want to say everything you've said over the past 5 minutes is totally true. Like the isolation, the bridge, the reality that like you can't have funding until you already have customers, and the knowledge of how to like do that bridge, like that's 100%. So you're like definitely not an island in that, and I'm not an island in that ever. DPetty was my best friend through that whole process. So I was one of the people you're talking about when you said young, no savings, went out and did it. It doesn't really make it that much better. But yeah, I just wanted to like I don't know how many other people are startup founders in the audience because I just stepped into this because it seemed interesting. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of validation because everything you said was 100% correct.
Yeah, so you need to find some more people here tonight so you have your support.
Get
group.
along with your parents, which is really hard whether you're an entrepreneur, if you're young and doing it, or have savings, or I don't know. DPetty is amazing.
Hey, Monica. My name is Jetty.
Hi.
This is really cool. I really liked all your insights. On the heels of a conversation that I had here a few minutes ago, it seems like you talked to a lot of people and you got a lot of just like, I don't think that having contradictory opinions left and right is unique to any startup founder, but I think for a lot of us in the room, especially those who are considering entrepreneurship or in the early stages, how do you navigate mentor whiplash or advisor whiplash?
I have a real plan for that, so I'm glad you asked. So here's my philosophy, and this is how I approached it, is because it didn't ever bother me, and this is why, is that when people have opinions, they're usually coming from somewhere. And I do that with my team too, is so I ask a lot of questions. And usually what I found is it could all circle back to one thing. So say someone says, you don't have enough this. Like, so, and someone else says, I think you need to be spending your money on marketing. And someone else says, I just don't see that the market's big. Once you start asking them questions, you get down to what the real concern is. So a lot of times I worked with the assumption that everyone is just seeing the elephant, the blindfolded touching the elephant story, and it's different. Everyone describes it differently. So I usually came in with the assumption that we're all looking at the elephant and trying to understand where that person is coming from. Because that let me do two things. One is it let me know that this guy who just cannot stop talking about marketing and thinks, I had people telling me to flip the model. So it's all extremes. But what I learned is I could tell what he thinks is most important. So now I know when to go back to him. So, for example, I think of this one guy who kept saying, and I won't get it right, this is years ago, but kept saying, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, I did this, and you should do this. And I'm like, it makes sense, but I'm not there. Sure enough, a year later, I was like, that's what I want to do. I'll go talk to Brian because he's been telling me for a year and I didn't grasp it because I wasn't there yet. Or someone else. So, and again, if you have the assumption that there's valid advice and your two goals are to keep digging in to understand why they're saying what they're saying, and also then just where they're coming from, because that advice, sometimes you just can't absorb it all, but it will literally will pop in your head months later and you'll want to follow up.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great tactical framework. I can definitely confirm from my own experience that if you talk to like a product person about a marketing, guess what kind of advice you're going to get? Product advice. Same goes for any other sets of like A or B conversations.
And you can also judge, so by asking the whys and finding out where they're coming from and what their experience is, you can usually just tell, oh, they're looking at it from this vantage point, and then then it's easier to agree or disagree. Like if someone comes from a background or a focus or a goal that you just don't share, then you're like, oh, thanks, that's really interesting to learn about it. But it's easier to not feel whiplash because you're just going to let go of it. Like if it has nothing to do with you because they're coming from a standpoint. Maybe they come, one of my favorite people oh my God, I say this and I'm blank on his name, the CMO at Indeed. Oh, he was awesome. He was so great during text. Yes. So nice and so great. But his reference point was always consumer focused. And I mean, everything he said I thought was golden. It made so much sense. I got a lot of, I felt like I was learning, but I kept coming back to we're just not like, and it let me play around with the idea of doing this more consumer focused, but I'm like, it is just not right for these reasons. I don't know if that's helping, but it really helps if your attitude is they've got something to give me. Let me understand why they're saying what they're saying versus they're telling me to do X and I need to consider doing X. Because if you stop with their advice, you haven't learned anything because that's not what matters. It's why they're telling you to do X. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Okay.
Thank you, Amanda, for all this insight. And that previous question kind of piggybacks on what I want to answer, specifically when you pivoted from authors.me to StoryFit, and you share about this large feedback circle with Techstars and also the CEO circle. When you're doing a pivot, that's really when you get a lot of feedback from advisors and friends. Can you talk about specifically what propelled you to go to the StoryFit model and the advisors' feedback on that?
There's a hint of desperation and then also some intelligence. Now, and also advice, you only get it when you ask at some point. So sometimes I'm in the middle of things and not asking any opinions. So I was really in denial that it's a pivot, even though we changed the name. But the thing I was trying to solve for is we launched with authors.me, which was a marketplace. So we were selling to both sides, the publishers and the writers. And what we found is that the selling to the publishers was better. And so what we had to do is change the name, right? Because authors just screams that we're working with the consumer side and with the writers. And so that was part of when we just changed the name. So we took the technology out of what we were offering to run the platform, pulled it out, and then now just sell it straight to the publishers. So I didn't really answer your question about the advice, but I think the advice that took me there was talking to so many people about solving marketplace issues. And then what I realized is I don't want to solve the consumer side of this marketplace. It had too many risks. It wasn't a good fit for me. It really could have been. I didn't want to monetize the writers. They do something called writing, which is a hassle because when you don't please them, it's just like blogs and it was just crazy. And I thought, we're not at a place where we can make enough of these people happy right now that I can win, but I know I can win with the publishers. And for me, that was a better fit. So those are kind of the things, but like, I'm sorry, I'm just sort of working backwards, but that was the advice I kept getting was I got so much advice on how to grow the marketplace and decided I didn't want to grow marketplace. I wanted to go B2B, and then the name didn't fit. Is there any more? Oh.
I was hoping for an example of one of your success stories from StoryFit of how you delivered results and the technology behind those results.
So there's one that it's just fresh in my mind. Last week I was in LA, and this is a studio who's given us a script. It's a huge script, huge cast. It's going to come out in December. You know, I'm under NDAs with more studios than I can tell you. A short aside is there was one large studio that we're talking, and I misunderstood her, and I thought she was ready to promote it, and I said, look, this is great. You know, no one lets us talk about what we're doing with them yet, so this would be really great if we could share this. And she says, oh, no, I'm not going to be that kind of studio either. So, but this one last week, they do something called comp. So one of our applications, so what we do, all the disruption that's happened, if you look at Netflix and kind of OTT over the top, a lot of it is in understanding the audience, right? So before, the audience used to be the quadrant, you know, your gender, age, income. So this information is very specific, and that's how they worked marketing. Well, Netflix blew that model up. They said, no. We have, you know, thousands of audience sectors, not just age. But what it means is that we can be now in the same audience sector because we both stream videos on Wednesday nights, and we eat pizza. So whatever those elements are, then they found a way to really blow it up. And so what we're saying is, if you want to be connected to all these audience groups, you better know your story. So we've really blown up everything that you can understand from your story. So we measure, and using machine learning, measure everything from how the characters relate and to the ups and downs to the sentiment of the overall story, but also, you know, whether a particular character is actually driving the movie forward. All of that then we use to compare to the audience. So this is a short version. So what that means is that they're making decisions and making audience assumptions, and it's all kind of gut driven. So we worked with this group who had two factions. It was one of those where two studios are rolling out. One studio really thought that they could go after the male audience on this movie, and wanted just to do a big swath, like really go after, you know, like all men. Men are going to watch this. And all women. I mean, so it was just a huge swath. The side studio that we were working with said, look, you know, these kind of guys aren't going to watch it. These kind of guys aren't going to watch it. These women aren't going to watch it. And so they wanted to understand the nuances of who to go after. And so that's what we delivered. We said, look, you're advertising, gosh, it's hard to do without naming movies. You're advertising, they wanted to comp it to a movie that was a male lead, had measurable high tones of comedy within a drama. And we show them the measurements and say, this is a female-led movie. It is a drama. It has low levels of comedy and the highest level of sadness we can see. And so we were able to say, look, we can show you the insides of these movies aren't alike. So if you're going to bring people in thinking they're going to see this movie, they're going to be surprised. So that's an example of kind of the information that we went back.
There we go. You mentioned both during your investing round and implied in your last story that there's a reluctance among your clients to admit that they're using your service. Do you think that is, I mean, just quickly why that is, and do you think it is, how much of a break is that putting on your growth?
It's a huge issue, and it has really changed over the last couple years. I mean, night and day conversations when I had publishers 3 years ago say, you know, we have editors for that. I mean, that is 100% quote. And so, and now they're kind of realizing that, look, you can do a lot with people, but you can't, you know, we can compare you across hundreds of thousands of characters across every movie, you know, the last many years. And we can compare it to, you know, hundreds of thousands of books. And so just the idea of just really understanding where you fit in the model is huge. But where we find that we sell best into is either marketing, number one, or acquisitions. The most sensitive area is the creative development. And so we really, I'm really careful when we go there. And one deal that we lost was because the CTO and the IT group were excited about it because they had been wanting to build something like this and realized we had. And this was early on, and I never made this mistake again, is that they went and asked her, and they came back, we asked around, we asked the creatives, and they don't need this. And what we found is we really have to spend time working with the creatives and showing them that, look, you've been making all these hard decisions with no data. This is data that just supports and lets you kind of check your gut. And that's what really we did, although it was marketing on this last week, is she was like, I really think it's this, and I think it's these movies. And I said, yeah, look why. Like, here's why. Like, you can measure just the way this movie flows and the way it ends, the way the characters relate to each other, and the way the dialogue, the measure of the dialogue is absolutely like, it matched her gut, but she didn't have a way to communicate it and argue it with everyone else. So, but like the fear of machine learning, and who makes all the stories about scary robots and AI taking over the world? It's the very people we're talking to, right? This is the movie industry. So, you know, that for sure, I'm trying to think if there's anything harder that we face. That might be the hardest. But that's going to change, right? You can't have Amazon, Netflix, Apple now's, right, putting their hat in the ring, Disney, everything that they're doing, you know, acquiring 20th Century Fox is all for this OTT move. So this is going to change, and we're ahead of anyone else in our ability to measure storytelling data. So that's where we're trying to position ourselves. Did you have something? No.
The question I had was about how did you determine early product market fit, and how did you like really get, like you were talking about how it's easier to sell to the publishers than the authors, and then how did you find which publishers exactly, in that iteration process?
Just lots of conversations, and I sometimes I think, as a founder, you have to go have all the conversations. I sometimes have talked to people who are like, yeah, as soon as I can get a salesperson. And I just think it's a million conversations, because the only way you can feel it is, like listening to them and going, okay. And so I just remember realizing, the smaller publishers, like where they're publishing enough books that they're really busy, but not so much that they have huge, companies, were the easiest to get in first. So once I figured that out, then I talked to them first. The large publishers just took forever. So, and we're kind of playing around with the same thing on studios, like what's the right size that we can move fastest? Because right now they move, but they're very long conversations. There's something else you said. Oh, and one thing I did really early, because part of it is there's always this internal debate. And if I'm the only one talking to customers, then everyone's like, I think we should do this. I think we should do this. And I'm like, well, nobody wants that, but I'm the only one. So I made people, and I'm talking the most introverts, like, here's your list. You're going to have to just cold call. And had everyone, and by everyone, there was 4 of us then, so it's not like, but had everyone spend a whole day, and I gave them a target goal of phone calls, because it's just so different when you can hear it firsthand. And I try now to get as many people able to hear, and that's one of my plans to really improve, is just start pulling people into whenever it's a phone call and not in person, like I'm there in person, to pull more people in so that they can hear it firsthand. One of the guys that, senior engineer that I've worked with at Demand Media a long time, I thought that he was so looped in, and I pulled him into a conversation. This was with Amazon last week, and had him on the phone, and he's like, wow, I never heard that pitch. I never heard you do that. That was great to hear them say this. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe. And it just really came to me that he hadn't heard that firsthand and hadn't heard the excitement on the other side, right? And so he's like, man, they really like that. And then I was like, well, yeah, of course, I really do get to hear, like, first it was hard times. I hear this enthusiasm, excitement many times a day now. And so I really want to make sure everybody hears that as well. So anyway, I think like firsthand conversations are the way you do it. Then you get people on the record. And then even if they've used it for a week, if they're excited to talk about it, you put it in writing. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, the package and the story that you put together for investors. I mean, every investor, every round I go wants to talk to customers and wants to hear from customers. And so anything you can get, if they'll do a video, if they'll do anything, collect it, while they're happy and start getting that in. Because that's proof, even if they're not paying. Like, that's the first level. Just get them on there and say they like it. Proving that they're going to pay for it, is another step, but like kind of one step at a time.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you guys for being such a nice audience. Sure.
All the questions done? All right. Cool. One thing I forgot to mention at the very beginning is our sponsors. So we have a sponsor and a partner. Egan Nelson Law Firm is a sponsor. They help provide support for this group and this event. And then, of course, Capital Factory giving us this awesome space. We're very lucky to have it. So I just wanted to mention them real quick. But anyway, thanks for coming. And we have time to hang out and chat with Monica and amongst yourselves.
Hey, can I just shout out? I have a couple people from my team here tonight. So if you are interested in StoryFit, you guys wave. They're so nice to come. They listened to me all day today, and then they came here.
Okay, raise your hands again. Who's from StoryFit? Okay,
two,
you got to
three.
find these people, find out what's the real
Yeah,
truth
the
here.
real, yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, thanks very much.